Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, early evening. Thanks for having me in. You get me for the next 45 minutes to an hour, so whether you like it or not, right? I chose the first part of the presentation. It's my daughter's 14th birthday today, so I have to get home or I'll be in big trouble. Excited to be here. This is a fun part of my job, is being able to interact with our campus community. As I go through some slides today, most importantly, I am going to truly intersect, similar to what the first deck slide here says. I am truly going to intersect real world into today's discussion. So as I go through the conversation here, please ask questions. Happy to stop, happy to answer as best as I can, and bring as much real world into it as we possibly can. I think that that's what makes learning most effective and something that you'll be able to tangibly take away from this and apply in the future. What we're going to spend the time on here today is really getting into where that intersection between crisis management and leadership comes in. And it's my understanding in talking with Professor Happ that there's a variety of different backgrounds in here from an academic standpoint. So you're coming from a variety of different schools and probably different perspectives. And that's great, because the reality is this. Every single one of your organizations at some point in time is going to deal with a crisis. On average, you're going to see roughly every 3 to 7 years an organization go through a crisis. That's not a hard and fast, that's a rough approximate, but you are going to see organizations either survive or they're going to fail based on the type of crisis they're going to deal with, and in addition to that, how well they're able to manage it from a leadership perspective. We see organizations that manage incidents very well, and I'll share a couple of those examples here in a few minutes. We see organizations that fall completely flat, and typically it's front and center news, and we often sit and armchair quarterback it and say, how in the world would they say that? Or how in the world would that be the approach? What adds to the element of complication today, even further, what I mean by today, meaning this day and age, is certainly social media. In this industry of emergency management, continuity of operations, which is also known as business continuity in the private sector, security, crisis management, social media has changed our world completely. Because we're now dealing with almost instantaneous information coming out in massive quantities and trying to decipher whether or not that's real or somebody's own interpretation or, in fact, completely false. And how do you vet through all of these different factors in addition to, in real time, having to actually respond to the incident? So you're not only dealing with information that's coming in, you're also dealing with that is coming from your general population. You're also dealing with information coming in from radio, from 911 calls, and a variety of other sources that you're reacting to try to manage the incident and ultimately get the organization back whole as quickly as possible. And when we deal with incidents here, we're dealing with stuff every single day at the University of Michigan. There's constantly things happening. Now, most of the time, knock on wood, it's not real significant types of things, but we see medical emergencies every day. We have power outages, we have hazardous material spills, we have small fires. These are things that are not out of the norm on a routine basis for us, and we're used to dealing with. Where the complexity comes in is when you start to ramp that up into other spaces. So when you have to all of a sudden evacuate an entire building. What happens in that scenario? So if you're walking to a class on the diag and you see a building dump, what's your first reaction? This is the interactive part now.
I wonder what's going on over there.
What's going on? So what is, in today's day and age, what else happens? So you're wondering what's going on. Somebody else is on what? This? What's happening over there? Boom. takes off like wildfire. Next thing you know, you've got information going in 1,000 directions and trying to figure out, you've got to keep an eye on that in addition to managing the emergency or the conditions happening. So I could take this presentation, we could go 3 hours plus easily. We're not going to do that to you. But I shared that there's a lot of different lanes we could go down in this space. So what I'm going to try to do is give you a very holistic, broad approach to crisis management and leadership, and then certainly go ahead and ask questions as you see appropriate. So it's pretty straightforward here from what the slide says, and I'm not going to read it, but I can tell you that there are organizations that have very strong leadership, and they come to the forefront real quickly when a crisis happens on how well they can lead the organization. Now, day-to-day normal operations, it's a whole different ballgame. Because a lot of today's corporate CEOs have strong business backgrounds. They're good in the financial space. They may be good in the sales space. But not too many of them actually have a lot of training in true crisis management. So what does that mean? If you're a CEO of a Fortune 500 corporation, it's to a large extent trial by fire. Now, a lot of them are cutting their teeth as they work their way up the organization. They're dealing with a variety of different types of scenarios. But what if you're the CEO that's the lucky person that, bam, the big one now hits? Where I'm going with this is it's surrounding yourself with the subject matter experts as much as you possibly can. It's just because you're the leader or you're in a leadership role, a supervisory role, a managerial role, doesn't mean you have to have all the answers. You have to have the ability to say, I don't know, but I have people around me or I know where to go to get the information. That's what makes successful leadership, especially in crisis management types of scenarios. Because the reality is most individuals just don't have that level of experience running the day-to-day operations of the business. And nor necessarily should they, but they need to surround themselves with the appropriate people, and they need to know where to go get it and be honest with themselves. And I'll touch a little bit further in that space in a few minutes as well. So when you think about different incidents that have happened, there's a couple of, I won't hit on all of these. Some of them are probably just front and center. Others, it may take a little bit of time. But you see Mickey Mouse there. When you think about the incident that happened at Disney last year where the little kid got taken into the water by the alligator and didn't return, horrific scenario. There is no one that's paying thousands of dollars to go to Disney to have that experience take place. What's absolutely phenomenal about Disney is the level of crisis management, emergency management, and emergency preparedness that they have in place. They managed this incident perfect. Because when you dissect that particular incident, 3 days after it happened, it disappeared. It's not that the incident didn't happen. It's not that the family isn't grieving. It's not that individuals aren't impacted by it. But Disney knows how to protect the brand. The brand to Disney is everything. That is their bread and butter. And they know they deal with crisis all the time, and they prepare themselves to manage these types of events. Now, reverse that scenario. So we've got Disney in one corner. Let's take United in another corner. United has had a bad year. Are we going to all agree to that? It's been one thing after another. They've gotten a little bit better in each incident, but none of them have gone well. They've had 3 or 4 incidents over the course of a year that have just been one thing after another. They continue to remain in the press. So when you think about crisis management at its core is truly brand reputation. You are managing your brand. You are protecting your brand, because your brand is what? Everything. Everything. If we're talking private sector, brand is dollars. If we're talking University of Michigan, brand is, that block M is this institution. We will protect this brand by all means. And you go, and it doesn't, you can take any organization. So if the brand is tainted, what happens to the organization? It's not going to be good. Your financials take a hit, your reputation takes a hit, and it's a cascading effect. Marriott, recently in the news. This is an interesting one in a couple of different lights. One, they had 620 guests staying at a property in St. Thomas. Hurricane Irma comes in, does an extensive amount of damage, they're trapped. So you've got 620 of your guests there on this property trapped. Can't go anywhere, no power, it's a disaster. Marriott is able to actually lease a ship from the Dominican Republic, get the ship, coordinate, get the ship over to St. Thomas, pick up these 620 guests, move them over to Puerto Rico, and put them up in Marriott property in Puerto Rico. All expenses paid, money for incidentals, money for food. What are they doing? At its core, what is Marriott doing?
Protecting its time?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Marriott, that's 620 individuals that Marriott knows. One, certainly they're worried about safety. So don't get me wrong that I'm not trying to skip over the life safety aspect of this. That's certainly a priority one. But as we look at and evaluate this, Marriott is taking a proactive approach and recognizing that this is about protecting people's lives, but additionally making sure that their brand is protected as well. Because they want those 620 people to come back and utilize their properties in the future. Chipotle, another good one. Everybody recall that one? We had a similar in some regards with Michigan Dining last year. What happens in our space here at the university, so in Chipotle they truly have a foodborne illness. What happens in Michigan Dining pretty much every year is when the flu breaks out, if we get a norovirus, non-foodborne related, one of the first assumptions that is often made is that it's a foodborne illness. So this is a brand issue for Michigan Dining specifically. It is very safe to eat in Michigan Dining. In fact, they've got excellent food. They do a phenomenal job. But one of the challenges they always have every single year is that as soon as something happens, as soon as the word norovirus hits, it's immediately assumed, well, it's got to be foodborne related. Not necessarily, and oftentimes it's not. But when you think of a crisis management and protecting brand, what does that mean? You have to get in front of that story. You have to be upfront and making sure that people understand that it's perfectly fine to be eating in our dining facilities. That this has nothing to do with foodborne illness. Reverse that, Chipotle, the exact opposite. Chipotle had a supplier who had, I believe it was lettuce, if I recall off the top of my head, that was tainted, and that resulted in some pretty catastrophic loss. To the point of their stock still has not completely stabilized, and it's been well over a year since that last outbreak occurred. So it's hit them back pretty hard. Going back to Marriott real quick too, what was interesting following the shift, so you've got the success story, you've got the feel good, they did all the right things. What they ran into on the flip side was some political dynamics, which is interesting when we think of, do we have any public policy students in here? A couple? What's interesting on that front is it turned into a little bit of a political challenge because you're dealing with international territories. And so to be able to just pull a ship up and have people get on, you can't just let everybody on. So they had a lot of people there on St. Thomas that wanted off the island, and Marriott couldn't do anything more than with the 620 individuals. And that's another minor crisis that they have to manage, because then what's the perception? That Marriott's not letting us on this ship. When in reality, there's a lot more factors that go into it than just Marriott making the decision that we don't want to help you. It wasn't their call. You start getting into passports and all of those types of things that have to be accounted for, which get into the public policy space. I mentioned, and I'll just touch on this briefly, our priority, regardless of what the type of incident is, we look at it from an all hazards perspective. So everything we do, we're looking at from any all hazards that can impact our operations, our reputation. Whether it be a pandemic, whether it be an active attacker, whether it be a fire, whether it be a power outage, we look at it all encompassing. Priority one is life safety. Bottom line is we need to protect people, our community. Priority two is incident stabilization. How do we stabilize this as quickly as possible and resume normalcy as much as we possibly can? Priority three is property conservation. Again, can we get business up and running in a timely fashion so that we can get people back to their day-to-day lives? I use this slide a lot, and the reason I do is because there's a lot of publicity, news coverage, all that type of stuff comes into play. Typically, when you have some type of violent act, and unfortunately, it's become more and more in this country. It's something that we take very seriously. The reason I share this slide is it's not to get into the whole active attacker space today. It's more so to get into the space of what we found is that we can't allow ourselves to put too much focus in one area versus the other. And I'll give you a really good example of this. So in September 11, 2001, we all know what happened. It was with the terrorist attack. Following September 11, 2001, the federal government came out and essentially said all federal funding as it relates to emergency preparedness needs to be dedicated towards terrorism. So any planning, any training, any exercising, any federal dollars that you were going to utilize were going towards terrorism. It was terrorism, terrorism, terrorism. Which, there was some merit to that. But, what happened 4 years later? Katrina. Nothing to do with terrorism whatsoever. So, it's a great example of us as a country even allowing the pendulum to swing too far to the right or too far to the left, and not staying in that center of recognizing that we have to make sure that we're taking into account a wide variety of hazards and threats that could impact our operations. And so that was a massive lesson learned that we certainly did a better job after Katrina, and we're seeing it in, with Sandy. There were certainly a lot of lessons learned there, and now we're seeing it in Harvey and Irma. As catastrophic as both of those events are, they've actually done a pretty good job. There are substantial improvements from the federal government's response and the state response and the local response in both of those incidents in comparison to what we experienced in Katrina. But there's been a lot of dollars, there's been a lot of planning, there's been a lot of training and exercising that's gone into preparing for those events, knowing that we were going to experience that at some point in time. I'm going to go through a couple slides pretty quickly here. You can, what I will say is what you see here is NIMS. NIMS is the National Incident Management System. For those of you that have more of a significant interest in this, there are a lot of online courses available through FEMA. You can go online, you can actually take and get certificates for incident command training. They're good courses. They're the backbone of our emergency response infrastructure nationally. And I'm going to just hit on a couple of key highlights. So NIMS really came out of following 9/11. The incident command system came well before that. It actually came out in the early 1970s from the Wildland Fire Service and how to manage wide, broad scale events with lots of different operations. But when you think about NIMS, it really is a national effort to bring 5 key components into a singular umbrella. And what you see up here. Specifically, command and management is one section of that. And the reason I'm bringing it up to this class is because it's so important that it's such a key cog in the wheel for a successful response and a successful recovery. So, and I'll get into a little bit more on that. But you can see that there's components of the incident command system, multi-agency coordination systems, and public information. Public information in particular, I'm going to share a couple of real-world experiences there that I think will be helpful. The incident command system is a management structure. It's flexible, it's scalable, it's something that you can utilize in day-to-day, it's something you can utilize in an emergency. It is not strict to you shall do X. You have the ability to scope it to meet the needs of your operation and your detail. As an example, we use it for every football home game. We use it for spring commencement. We use it for any major incident here on campus. So it is something that we deploy on a regular basis, and it allows us to make sure that we have proper command and control in place and that people are reporting up through appropriate chains. Manageable span of control is another important thing. Not having people all over the place doing their own thing. Making sure, essentially, in a nutshell, having your arms around the entire operation and having everyone with defined roles and responsibilities. As you manage crisis, that becomes more and more important. Because I'm certain that every single one of you can think of a scenario that you've seen, whether you've experienced or you've actually you've seen on TV or in the news, where the left hand and the right hand are completely disconnected with regards to a particular incident that occurred. So you're hearing one thing over here, same organization, but you're hearing things over here and you're hearing things over here. That's bad. That's the kind of thing that the incident management system is trying to protect against. That everything funnels up and that decisions are made by leaders. It can differ from day to day in the administrative organizational structures, and where I want to hit on this most specifically is that what you do day to day and what you do in an emergency could be 2 entirely different things. And this is the flexibility. This is knowing organizations as a leader, as you go into wherever you go beyond the University of Michigan, and you take on a leadership role. The ability to flex from your day-to-day job into being able to truly manage people is an art. And what I mean by that is that there's a lot of folks who look at leadership and look at management of, I want to manage people. It's an entirely different space than your day-to-day processing, X, Y, and Z. Because when a crisis hits, who is your staff looking to? You. The leadership. They're looking for you to provide answers. They're looking for you to provide guidance. And that's really, truly what this gives you. I mentioned it's scalable. It certainly can fit any size event. It's cost effective. It avoids duplicating of efforts. And again, this is where so many organizations get in big trouble, is where they start to duplicate efforts. One of the things we work on here in the university is continuity of operations planning. And as you all know, this institution is very large. And with a lot of, 19 schools and colleges, we've got a major Trauma One health center. We have a lot of activity going on this campus, 24/7, 365. Tremendous amount of research, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When you think of it contextually at that level, it's big. But when you start to bring it down into, let's just take this classroom as an example. This is a small subsection of the university initiative, this room, the folks in this room. However, we all have our own perceived needs, our own wants, our own desires, our own expectations. So when you start to think about it in that space of, I'm a researcher, or I have a lab, or I work in this office building, it becomes much more individualistic. This is not unusual, it's very normal, and it's something that takes a lot of effort and a lot of planning, because we can't plan for the individual, we have to plan for the institution. We need individuals to plan for themselves. We need units to plan for themselves, which then carry into the bigger plan of protecting the institution, which again, going back to, protects the brand. That is not to say, that is not getting away from the life safety component. But when you think of it from an individualistic standpoint, this young lady's desires, wants, goals, needs may be vastly different than this young man right here. Now, they could be the same, but if you're up on North Campus and you're on Central Campus and you're on South Campus, your desire, it could be entirely different. The other fact is that what's happening on North Campus may not have any impact to Central Campus whatsoever. And we see that oftentimes too. So you may have an expectation that you think is going to come and help, or that will fulfill your needs, that's just not even realistic. So how do you set that standard across the board? And that is a dynamic, and that's a challenge that requires leadership, a lot of planning, and a lot of coordination. And that's the space that this provides. And this gives you that backbone to put those plans and those pieces together. It's very much like a puzzle. Incidents versus events. So when we run a Michigan football game, what is the event? The game. The game is the event. We have incidents within the event. Every single game. Standing up that incident management structure allows us to be in a ready position to manage the event, knowing the incidents are going to happen. We know that we are going to have medical emergencies every single football game. In fact, we'll average somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 to 90 medicals every game. We know we're going to transport approximate 8 to 12 individuals every single game to the ED. Pretty much automatic. But when you think about it, it's 110,000 people. There's, you think about that around the city of Ann Arbor, that's not that uncommon. I mean, medical emergencies are an everyday occurrence. My point is that standing up the operation for the event is preparing to manage the incidents that are within the event. So, last year, How many of you were in the stadium? Anybody? Wisconsin, Michigan, number 4 versus number 8, 110,000 people. Fourth quarter, 14-7 game, nationally televised. We've been watching a severe weather event move from the south, down south of Toledo actually, which was a rather unusual scenario because most of the weather patterns come from the Chicagoland area or even across Lake Michigan and then into our area. Typically not from the south up to the north. But the hand we were dealt this particular day, almost a year ago, Zach, was a scenario where this weather event was slow moving, but it was moving towards us. And it's a close game, which means nobody's leaving. So we start knowing we've got plans in place. We start communicating, showing on the video boards that the weather radar, and again, nobody's going to leave because it's 2 nationally ranked teams in a 14-7 game. Well, the TV timeouts magnified even further by the fact that every 30 seconds they move to a TV timeout to again revenue. So you've got an extended period of time. Close game, coaches are calling timeouts. All the while, what? Severe weather is coming closer and closer and closer. So, I thought we had captured the actual screenshot. Unfortunately, we didn't, so I had to improvise slightly. And so this star is meant to represent, it was about 30 seconds to go in the game. Our protocol and our policy procedures are that at 10 miles, the game is stopped, dump in the stadium. So if you're in the bowl, you're out. We're evacuating the stadium. We've had to do it twice since I've been here. It's not a fun day. I don't care to have to do it again, hopefully, but we're ready for it if it does happen. What happened was about 30 seconds to go in the game, and it wasn't more than a quarter mile outside the 10-mile ring, which is what that red ring is that you see there, which is the point of no return, that we had a lightning strike. By pure, thank you, we were able to get the game over, and then probably about 15 minutes after the game ended, the skies opened up and it was quite the thunderstorm that moved in. And it's as close as you ever want to get to having to play that scenario out. So I share this with you from the standpoint that, one, having plans in place are extremely important because you have something to go to and something to reference. You have to have something to work off of and details of why you're going to make the decisions you're going to make. 2, experience played significantly into this, having been through these scenarios before and knowing what we need to do and that we've trained our people on what they need to do. And 3, having individuals in place who will make the decision on that moment's notice. Now I'm going to touch on that in a few minutes a little bit further because that is truly something that is a skill set and not easy to do. I will say in this scenario, there were about 7 individuals that were pacing faster than you can keep up with for that 30 seconds. It was not a fun time in the command post. Bringing this kind of all together from a multiple levels of activation, what are we getting at with this slide? Every incident starts at the local level and it ends at the local level. So if we go back to Katrina, there was a lot of blame that was immediately laid at where? Federal government. The reality is, it started in New Orleans and it ended in New Orleans. Has anybody been to New Orleans since Katrina hit recently? Somewhat recently? There are still remnants of Katrina today in New Orleans. The city still shows the effects of Katrina. What I'm sharing with you is not criticizing the city of New Orleans, the state of Louisiana, or the federal government. It's to make a point that every incident starts at the local level and it ends at the local level. And that is an example, that's a great example of such, where the city of New Orleans knew for many, many years prior. Army Corps of Engineers have been telling them. I mean, the city sits underneath water. That a Category 5 hurricane is not going to be a good scenario. Well, it happened to be the perfect storm, and we saw what played out. What unfortunately transpired following that is a lot of political play, a lot of second guessing, and a lot of lack of leadership, frankly, in stepping in and trusting plans and making things happen versus getting into the bureaucracy of whose responsibility is it. When you boil it down, when it gets to a life safety, whose responsibility is it? It's all of ours. At that point, we need to do whatever we can to protect our population and our communities and get back to, get them to safety and then begin the recovery process. So when you think of it in that context, the organization's plan, so U of M's plan, is at the base. City, county, state, national. When you call, the cavalry's going to come. They're going to come in and support. But at some point, each one of these layers start to peel off, and it's back to us as a standalone. And that's the preparedness level, and that's the leadership, and that's the, from a crisis management standpoint, what we're trying to make sure we're covering is our brand, our reputation, and first and foremost, the safety of our community. Incident commander. So this plays into the incident command system. The only thing I want to highlight here is this box, the most qualified person. What you're going to find oftentimes, and this is in leadership, and I talked about CEOs and their level of emergency preparedness. Some of them have a lot more than others, but I would say across the board, this is not a set of training that most CEOs are going to go through. It's going to be indoctrination by fire. And some of them do it really well, and some of them don't do it well at all. Most qualified is finding the individuals in your organization who have the abilities to make decisions in a time of high stress, anxiety, and frankly, chaos. Because you're going to find scenarios, you're going to find situations where you have individuals that have to make decisions that are life and death. I'll give you an example of that here locally. If we were ever to have a scenario that required us to evacuate the hospital, again, knock on wood, but if we have a scenario where we have to evacuate the hospital, the decision that the incident commander makes is a life and death decision. You have people in intensive care, you have people on ventilators, you have people receiving X, Y, and Z types of treatment, very unstable situations. You can't just dump a hospital and say, evac like it's this classroom. It doesn't work that way. Now, I'm not standing here suggesting by any stretch of the imagination that there aren't scenarios where that may be the best course of action. However, you have to have an individual who understands the set of circumstances, understands the decisions being made, and has the ability and leadership to make that decision. Because I can assure you the next day, there's going to be a lot of questions coming as to why did you do what you did. Evaluating the risk, working off the facts of what you know at that point in time, all of those play a significant role in that individual's decision making and their capabilities. And the reality is this, and this is not wrong, this is okay. Some people have it and some people don't. When I talk about a skill set, when I talk about an art, it truly is that. Some individuals can manage these types of scenarios very well, and others can't. And organizationally, the more time organizations put into finding out who those individuals are, the more successful they're going to be. And if you take that back to day-to-day operations, sometimes it's not the CEO level. Many times it's not. The CEO is going to be the face. The CEO is going to continue to promote the positive image, but it's oftentimes somebody else behind the scenes that's managing the details. Because this is a challenging set of work. Real quickly, I'm giving you this, this is what the incident command system looks like when it's fully laid out. So if you take 9/11, this is what the command structure looked like at a very high level. It drops into more charts than you can make sense of. But excuse me, you have an incident commander. You have somebody that's in charge of the incident. You have operations sections. So these are all the boots on the ground. These are the people that are doing things, responding to the event as an example. You have your planning section. These long-term events, Irma, perfect example. Harvey, perfect example. These aren't 8 hours and then over and everybody goes home. These are days, weeks, months, years. That's what this section is preparing for. What's the next set of objectives that we have to work on? What's the next 12 hours going to look like? They're forward thinking. They're setting the stage for that next group to come in and take over. Logistics. How do you coordinate all the moving parts that are coming in, whether it be food resources, toilets, sheltering. All of those components get brought into the logistics. And then you've got the finance side, which is how do you pay for it? How do you account for your damage assessment? How do you do your risk management from an insurance standpoint? All of those pieces of the puzzle, procurement, come into this finance section. Most of your incidents are going to be this person here, or a unified command, which means a multi-agency response, coming together, and your operations section. Most of the time you don't even need this. But that's the beauty of the structure organizationally. It allows you to set up a management structure that can expand and contract based on the scenario and the scale and the scope. Okay. Communications. Again, we could go 3-4 hours on this as well. What, who, how? I'm not going to read this slide. I'm going to give you 2 examples that we've experienced, one here and then the Ohio State incident. Here, several years ago we issued an emergency alert for, and I don't know that anybody was here at that time or not, some of you may remember it, for the chemistry building, where the report was an individual entering chemistry with a long gun. And it turns out it was ROTC who was returning. They used to be housed in chemistry building for a period of time, and they were returning equipment after a training that morning. And so, long and short is and where this ties into communications is we were quickly on it. We were quickly trying to determine, is this a real threat? Is it not a real threat? What is actually going on? We did indeed issue an emergency alert. We got the message out. By the time things happened so fast and so fluid in these scenarios that we were pretty much at the time of issuing the alert realizing also that there's not a threat, which is a good thing, and then you're following up with more information. The challenge is when you have a population the size of ours, which is basically a city, is that terminology means a lot. So when the word chemistry was in the alert, chemistry had meaning for us in this room that are non-health system affiliated, because chemistry, we know, is the chemistry building, or most folks do. There's also a unit within the health system that is chemistry. And so there was confusion in people in the health system not knowing if that was in the health system and where exactly that meant. Lesson learned. We learn from every type of scenario that we run or every type of incident we have. I share that because the communication is what you say and how you share it is absolutely critical. If you need people to do something, you have to be very specific and clear on exactly what that is. Because believe it or not, we get a lot of questions, well, I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do. You have to really craft your messaging in a way that is very clear and concise on, you need to do this, whatever this is. I'll give you another example on communication, on the communication front, and this gets into a little bit of the conspiracy theory side of it. When you look at the Ohio State incident last November, is everybody familiar with that incident? Where they had the gentleman jump out of the car with a knife and start attacking people? So what's really interesting about that particular scenario is that they actually had there was an alarm that a researcher had installed at his home that ran back to the lab. That's not supposed to be set up that way, but it was. And the alarm had gone off, and a grad student had called the researcher and said, hey, this alarm's going off. So the long and short of it is the researcher said, okay, well, or the professor said, pull the fire alarm. So the fire alarm guy goes out in the hall, pulls the fire alarm, building dumps. So everybody's outside. Fire department comes, public safety comes over, Ohio State PD comes over. They investigate. There's an officer just down the street who rolled over just for traffic control purposes. They mitigate this thing real quickly. There's no real big issue. The fire department and public safety are coming down the elevator. Doors open. They're walking out. Everyone's still outside, congregated out front. Car rolls up off the curb, runs into people. Guy jumps out, starts attacking. The officer who was on traffic control just down the street engages with the suspect and neutralizes the threat very quickly. That's how that scenario played out. So you had an incident that started off as a hazmat situation, then fire alarm, to an active attacker. The conspiracy theorists, and where this goes into the communication side, was social media blew up. I mean, it was boom. It was all over. Everywhere. What's amazing is some of the information on social media that morning was actually spot on. I mean, it was as accurate can be. Other elements of it were completely false. But what was happening also was people were saying that there had to be a second person because the fire alarm was pulled, which meant that they wanted to dump the building, put everybody outside so this guy could jive up and run people over and start stabbing them. Now that you know the full background, you know that that's not what happened at all. It was a complete coincidental situation. That's playing this process out and having to communicate effectively as this scenario plays of what the facts are and what the details are. Some of which you can release, some of which you may not be able to release, some of which you're not going to have the advantage of time. Now, I was able to run through that scenario in less than probably 3 minutes. The reality is that whole scenario played out over hours. Now, the actual incident was very quick. It was done and over with very fast. But the ability to communicate all of that detail wouldn't come out for days, weeks. So when you think about communication and the importance of it, that what, who, how is absolutely essential in putting together the full picture and the full scope of what you're actually dealing with. The only thing I'm going to say on this slide is the more exercising, the more training you can do, the better off you're going to be. And this is a progressive scope. getting everyone on board with an orientation, that's getting everybody in the same room, getting them to understand what you're even trying to do. And then building drills in, fire drills is a great example. Tabletop exercises, putting a scenario in front of this room, a hypothetical, and working through that allows you to start to react to how you would manage that event. And then all the way up to a full-scale exercise, which is the deployment of resources. This is the progressive nature that organizations need to take to put themselves in a position to effectively respond to, again, that all hazards type of situation, those all hazard threats that we face. Same goes for crisis management. This can be replicated in the crisis management space. Pick a scenario, a bad thing happens to your organization. How are you going to manage it? If somebody from your organization, let's just do a cyber attack, and you are Equifax. Oh wait, that happened. Right? What's the reputation right now? How many people are concerned about that? There's an organization that has that's a difficult one to recover from. Particularly when you have personally identifiable information on so many individuals in this country. And again, as I started off with, every 3 to 7 years an organization is going to go through a crisis. No one is immune to it. So today it's Equifax. Last year it was Disney. Tomorrow, who is it? Everyone's going to get hit. And so that's why this information is so important in putting this together, is that this is the backbone to building a successful architecture and being able to manage incidents and keeping your organization stable. So I alluded to the formula for success. I didn't come up with this. This is actually comes from the University or U.S. Department of Education. But I firmly believe that 80% of preparedness is in your training and exercising. 20% is in the plans. Probably many of you have heard the adage that the plan goes out the door as soon as a bad thing happens. Many times it does. But you're now relying on people's training and ability to think on their feet, having gone through scenarios that will get you to the end line, at least in somewhat of a stable situation, versus those that have done nothing. And with that, I will open it up for Q&A. Unless nobody has anything.
When you were speaking earlier about brand preservation and how that relates to crisis management, I thought about a possible moral dilemma that might come up specifically in the private sector. When an organization is engaging in crisis management and they need to make decisions that reflect positively for their brand, do you think that there's a chance that those decisions might lead to decreased outcomes for the actual victims of the crisis, so that the brand preservation can be increased and it can be forgotten about as fast as possible, like that type of stuff?
Yeah, yes, and I think if I'm understanding your question correctly, I think that the Disney scenario actually plays to that question well, and how successful they were with it. Because what Disney was really able to do, and correct it, and certainly if I'm going down a different direction, let me know. What Disney was able to do was Disney was able to take that particular situation, terrible event, and move it out of the public space. And so they were able to continue to manage it from a personal level and take care of the individual. And I don't know everything they did, but I'm certain they did a lot. But they were able to separate from public viewing into private, and knowing that they're protecting the brand, but they're still protecting the individual that were impacted by the scenario or the situation. So, whereas if you look at some of these other scenarios, we've seen organizations that seem to lead too much with, I'm going to protect the organization, and then they're trying to recover on, oh, wait, no, we got to make it look like we're taking care of people. And I won't name names, but we've seen that unfortunately more often than we've seen the Disney model or the Disney approach. And no, I'm not getting paid by Disney, by the way. Where they seem to have really found that sweet spot and that balance of making sure that they're protecting the brand, but at the same time knowing how to take care of the individuals that are impacted.
So I guess I have a follow-up question.
Yep.
In that specific situation, who's ultimately responsible for where that line is drawn? Is that like on, I'm trying to figure out how to best phrase this, but it seems like there's critical decisions being made that affect both parties, being the organization and the victims. And is there like a model or something that is usually referred to in these events, or is it just like someone makes a call and that's it? Or is this part of the system?
Yeah, it's the system that I showed you is really the backbone. What I think you're getting to is more of the makeup of the organization, the character of the organization. Some organizations you will find, and this is again a very generalized statement, some organizations you're going to find that are very caring, and other organizations that are very cutthroat. And some of that is ingrained in organizations that have a history of 100+ years of operations, and other organizations that are that take a completely different perspective on putting their people first, putting their community first, putting their investors first, however you want to look at it. I think that's the biggest difference. I'm not aware of a specific model, I guess, to direct to your question, that is, by the book, I guess, versus, again, I would point back to Disney as really being one of those organizations that is one of the best, in my opinion, out there of knowing how to manage both sides and protecting the brand at the same time making sure they're taking care of people. And some of it probably, frankly, can be chalked up to experience. They just deal with so much so often in the type of business they're in, whereas you have other organizations that they don't get hit with the same dynamics as often, and they're just not as experienced, or their culture is just completely different in the way they operate. And then oftentimes too, I think it goes. Bottom line is it goes back to leadership. I mean, you've got it's what's most important, and you see the true character of organizations come out oftentimes in a matter of crisis, based on the decisions they make and the way they manage it. How well are they taking care of their employees? And oftentimes they're fighting the stigma too of hearsay and other. The organization I used to work for, Marshall McLennan Companies, we lost 293 colleagues on 9/11. Actually, the first plane hit the floors of our offices in the Trade Center. We were in both trade centers, or in both buildings. And I remember sitting in a conference about a year after that, and there was a guy up talking and doing this presentation, and he had referenced our organization and that we didn't do X, Y, and Z. And it was, I approached him afterwards and said, what you said is completely false. The organization really went well beyond everything anybody could expect. But there's that side of it too, where you can get false stigmas that start to float out because people don't truly understand what's being done. A lot of organizations will try to separate public purview versus private. So those are the good questions.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one more, because I want to make sure you can hold you do it.
She said swim until 7 o'clock. So.
I don't know, but let's wrap this up.
Yep.
To the point that you just made, it seems like there's this fine line in terms of transparency. So how transparent should we be like in the age of technology, everybody's tweeting, you can't really control the information, as well as you don't want to like put out false information like that, people think everything's scientific and that. So where's that line, like how transparent, in your opinion, like should these boards be when things happen?
Great question. You, as an organization, you should be as transparent as you possibly can. And I'm not trying to skirt around that question. You can't hide behind this will go away, us saying nothing's going to solve the problem. The more facts you provide and the more information you can provide in context. So you don't need to go into granular detail, but organizations that have the ability to admit something happened, show what they're doing to manage that particular situation, and be transparent that we're not hiding anything, are going to recover much better than an organization that doesn't. Because oftentimes what happens is if you're not being transparent or you're trying to, play this fine line of back and forth, you get into the game of the media is too sad. I mean, the media is going to eat you alive, putting it bluntly. I mean, they know they're going to start digging, well, wait a minute, let's talk over here and over here and over here, and chatter starts and boom. And we've seen organizations that have been completely, taken out at the knees because of just that. They thought they were going to be able to steer around something, and more information comes out instead of just being upfront and, hey, this is what happened and this is what we're doing. And so yeah, stay away from the granular, but definitely transparency is critical, especially in today's age. Information moves quick.
Thank you, Andy. All questions will be if they send you an email.
Absolutely.
So we'll get Andy's email out to folks. Just Andy Burchfield at
Easy.
Yes. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Happy birthday to your daughter.
Oh, thanks. Thank you. Have a good rest of the semester, everyone. Take care.